Hey guys, it's Zachary from HardwareZone, and today we're going to be talking about this. This is the Sony ZV-1 Mark II. Now I'm just going to go through some of the main specs real quick. This camera has a 20.1 megapixel 1-inch stacked CMOS sensor, Bion's X image processor. It has a fully articulated touch display, 931 dots. I think that's the right number. It has Sony's multi-interface shoe. It has built-in high-quality 3-capsule mic, and last but not least, it has a 18 to 50 mm f1.8 to f4 lens. The ZV series is sort of Sony's vlogging camera series. It's all made for video, which is why a lot of the functions here are designed or focused on videography. It is a compact camera, so most of the top plate is just very quick buttons to get you to shooting real quick. On off button, there is a mode switch between photography, video, and S&Q modes. You've got a dedicated button for still photos, you've got a dedicated button for video, and you've got some dedicated shortcuts for vlogging, such as background defocus button, and there's another button behind for product showcase, which is something vloggers sort of like to use, especially when they are showcasing products, you know, when they want to put a product close to the camera and you always have to put your hand there to focus on the product rather than a background. So this helps with that, but I'm not really going to talk too much about that, because all these features, if by now sounds sort of familiar, it's because the Sony ZV-1 Mark II is essentially the Sony ZV-1 with a different lens. Is that all there is to it? Well, obviously not. There are some other tweaks and upgrades and quality of life improvements, software improvements along the way, but by far the lens change is the biggest difference between the ZV-1 and the Mark II. Everything else that I've talked about, it has the same sensor, same processor, it's the same mic, same screen. It even has the same battery. It uses the same battery. This is the Sony NPBX1 battery. It's exactly the same. It has the same sort of chassis design, same button layout. Everything that you see here is exactly the same. I've said this many times. I have reviewed the ZV-1 before, so if you want to know about this camera and the features of the ZV-1 series, you can just check out my original review. Everything I've said there about the camera is still very much relevant today, because it's frankly the same camera, right? So I'm not going to repeat all of that. Stop right here, go and watch that review, then come back. For everybody else, let's talk about the differences. The ZV-1 had a 24 to 70 mm lens, which kind of was its chief complaint, because 24 mm just wasn't wide enough for vlogging, especially even at arm's length. You could barely fit yourself and some of your background in it. Sony solved that with the Mark II by giving it a much wider 18 mm lens. It's pretty fast too, f1.8, just like the ZV-1. And 18 mm is great. You know, you can fit yourself, you can fit the background, you could even fit one or two of your friends comfortably into the frame with that. But now, you're gonna hear this quite a bit for the rest of this video, because this camera is going to have a lot of caveats. There's a lot of buts, and it feels like a one step forward, 2-3 steps back kind of thing. But bear with me. So the main upgrade to this is that wider lens at the widest angle. Now, I said that the ZV-1 had a 24 to 70 mm lens. This has 18 to 50 mm lens. So you lose a bit of zoom range, which, I mean, to me it's okay. It's not really that bad a thing. I'm generally using this as a video camera, not as a photo camera, but you do lose some of that zoom range. The bigger problem is that at telephoto range, you're also losing speed. The ZV-1 had a f1.8 to f2.8 lens. This is a f1.8 to f4 lens, which is much slower at maximum telephoto, and that means it's really not going to be that great a camera to use at night compared to the ZV-1. Now, not only that, this camera seems to have a few other tweaks to it as well that's not really in the specs. The Mark II doesn't have a mechanical shutter. The ZV-1 does. And what that means is that for still photos, the slowest shutter speed this can go to is about 1/4 of a second, 1/4, and it doesn't matter if you go to manual mode, that's pretty much as low as you can go, which means, again, night shots not that great, low light shots or long exposure shots, you can't really do long exposure shots with this. Not only that, this does not have optical image stabilization as well. The ZV-1 did. And what this means is that it has to rely on digital stabilization. So you have to activate Sony's SteadyShot with this. And what happens with digital stabilization? It needs to crop the frame. And this sort of negates some of the effects of having a wider lens, you know, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, so you get what I'm saying. So you get an 18mm lens, but if you activate SteadyShot, you get a cropped frame and you're back to about 20 something. This is what it looks like with the ZV-1 Mark II SteadyShot turned on. And here's how it looks like with SteadyShot turned off. So you've got the full 18mm wide angle. Now, I'm not sure what the exact cropped is, but if I'm checking it against an iPhone's selfie camera, which is a 23mm lens, this is what it looks like on the iPhone 14 Pro selfie camera. This is just slightly wider with SteadyShot, so I kind of feel that it's around a 21-22mm range. So it's still better than 24, but the effect isn't that great anymore. Now, there's actually one more thing that they took away from the Mark II, which I also feel is attributed to the slower lens that they put on this, even though the processor is the same. So the processor is the same, the sensor is the same, it's the stack sensor, so it can do very fast output, but this can only do high frame rate shooting up to 120 frames per second. Now, if you remember, or if you don't, you should have watched my previous video on the ZV-1. The high frame rate shooting can go up to 960 frames per second. So 960 down to 120 is a very big drop. This is not even 240. It's 120. So it's not exactly a make or break feature, but you know what I'm saying? It feels like I give you one thing, but I take away so much more from the camera. It now feels like the ZV-1 Mark II has gone from a versatile vlogging camera that can also do other stuff, photography and you know, things, to a very specific vlogging camera that is best used when it's stationary. There is a silver lining to this. There is a way to get the full 18mm wide angle. Now, if you are doing a sit-down vlog, much like in this situation where your camera is not moving, you're just going to set it up static somewhere and you're the one that moves, or you're the one that's just sitting here talking to the camera, doing a live stream, then you don't need SteadyShot, right? So you can have that full 18mm wide angle, which is great. But the moment you pick up this camera and move around, you need SteadyShot, and that means cropping your image down to 21-22mm. So, are there any redeeming qualities for the ZV-1 Mark II? Yes, Sony's autofocus is amazing. I mean, you've got to give credit where credit is due. The autofocus on the ZV-1 Mark II is really fast. It locks on really fast. It has face detect, eye detect. The Mark II now has animal detection in video as well, so that's a plus. There's a whole host of quality of life improvements as well, one of them being the touch screen. You now have touch menus on both sides of the screen. So we're going to test the mic outdoors in a busy street. There's cars all around. There's a tree capsule mic on this thing, and the great thing about this camera is now that there is a touch screen, so I can actually change the mic orientations on this via the touchscreen. So it's now on auto mode. It will detect whether it's front, rear or surrounding, but I can at the tap of a button change this to microphone direction on the front. So this is what I sound like in microphone direction on the front. This is what it sounds like, the microphone direction in all directions. And this is what it sounds like with the microphone direction on the rear. And back to auto. You can also like sort of swipe up and you have another 2 rows of menus. You can change quite a lot of essential options while you're shooting or while you're vlogging. So you can access all these options without having to stop shooting or turn around and fiddle with dials and go into nested menus, all of that. So you know, not performance, but the experience of using the ZV-1 Mark II is really smooth, it's really intuitive, it's really well built for beginners. There are quite a lot of things that Sony has made in terms of upgrades or listening to its past users. For example, the screw thread at the bottom has been moved slightly to the side, so you can access your battery and memory card compartment much easier without having to, you know, remove your camera from a tripod and all those kind of things. This now has USB-C, which means it also supports USB power delivery, which is another great thing. Sony has also done sort of environmentally conscious thing. But for example, the dead cat, it sort of looks different from the original dead cat in the ZV-1, because that looked like a fluffy cat that just came out of a dryer. It's all poofed up. This looks like a wet cat because this is made out of recycled plastics. Yeah, so quite a lot of these things have made it into the camera that has, like I said, made the experience using it much better. But it goes back to my original point of a lot of these things are really great, and I think that it is really useful for first-time users. Sony is selling the ZV-1 series as the step up from a smartphone, right? They have other cameras in the ZV series now. Since the ZV-1, there was the ZV-E10, which is an APS-C sensor. This is a 1-inch sensor, APS-C sensor, and interchangeable lens. ZV-E10, they've also now launched the ZV-E1, which is a full frame sensor and also interchangeable lens. So the ZV-1 is the direct upgrade from a smartphone. Now, when the ZV-1 was launched in 2020, that was a question quite a lot of people asked, right? In terms of image quality and performance, you had a sort of, you can still argue for the ZV-1. It was a great camera back then. It came from a good pedigree from the RX100 series, good lens, good photo taking capabilities, good video taking capabilities, and it was good back then. But now it's 3 years later, we're talking about 3 generations of smartphones. The ZV-1 Mark II is still essentially the same camera. Yes, there are a lot of things that are improved, but you've got the same sensor, you've got the same processor. As much as I like the speed of the autofocus, it technically is still the same autofocus as the ZV-1. Nothing has changed, nothing has improved with the Mark II. So the question now is, if the Mark I, you know, could still be an upgrade for a smartphone, is the Mark II there? I mean, smartphones, basically every smartphone now has 10-bit HDR video recording. This still does 420 8-bit. That's the max, right? Phones like the iPhone 13 and iPhone 14 even has Apple ProRes, it's 422 10-bit. There are apps, third-party apps now for both Android and iPhones that allow you to shoot 10-bit log, and this is still stuck at 420 8-bit. In terms of photography, the auto mode is no longer as good as a smartphone. I really don't, I'm really struggling to see how I would recommend the Mark II against most users who at this point would have already own a smartphone. I'm not even saying you go out and buy a smartphone. I'm saying that you already own probably a smartphone, if you have one in the last 2 years, that can match the capabilities of this. Right? So if you wanted to upgrade from your smartphone at this point, you would actually be looking at the ZV-E10 or the ZV-E1 as your next upgrade. You're really not going to be looking at this. TLDR or TLDW in this sense, too long didn't watch. Anyway, in a nutshell, ZV-1 Mark II is the ZV-1 with a lens side grade and a touch screen menu upgrade. Now this goes for 1199 Singapore dollars, while the ZV-1 still retails for 1009, but I saw it on sale at the time of this filming for 959 Singapore dollars at the Sony store, so you could potentially get the ZV-1 for $240 less than the Mark II. Is it worth the premium for the lens and the touchscreen, or do you think you could go cheaper and just get the ZV-1 for the same imaging capabilities? Or the third choice, you could get the ZV-E10 instead. The kit for the ZV-E10 comes with a 1650mm power zoom lens. It is an APS-C camera, which is a larger sensor than this. It has more AF points than this, and although the kit lens is 24-75 equivalent, so it's on par with the ZV-1, but because it's an interchangeable lens camera, you could wait 3 years and save up and buy better lenses rather than wait 3 years and buy a whole new camera. What about you? Do you have the ZV-1 and you love it regardless, or do you have the ZV-1 Mark II? I touched this while I said the ZV-1. I meant the Mark II. Do you have the ZV-1? Did you upgrade? Are you thinking of getting the ZV-E1 instead? Full frame. Lots of choices from Sony. But this specifically, I want to hear from you. Tell us in the comments what you think. If you disagree with me, if you agree with me, I want to know all of it. It's been a long day, so I think I'll just end the video now. Have a nice day. See you in the next one. Hey guys, before you go, don't forget to check out HardwareZone.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Join in the conversation. Like and subscribe to our YouTube if you want to see more of these videos. Do it.